I know there's a little coffee out there too if you want a little coffee. And but I'm Kirk Popper. I'm a professor of horticulture here at K-State. We're going to talk pawpaw. And so I guess my first question is, have you ever tried a pawpaw fruit before? Great. Okay. One yes, one no. Did you? Oh, three. Yes. Well, you've had many pawpaws. So, do you actually have any planted at your place? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, very good. Oh, I'm not sure what he said. Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I got it in my hand. Yep. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about pawpaw. For those of you who don't know what a pawpaw is, it is a sometimes referred to as the Kentucky banana because it actually has this almost cluster of like banana fruit. Oftentimes, it is in the custard apple family. So if you've ever had cherimoya or soursop, it's kind of very similar flavor to that in a lot of ways. And it is a slow-growing tree, but it's not real slow, and it'll have these clusters of up to 2 to 5 fruit, sometimes even up to 10. And this is a native range map of where pawpaw is native, and you can see on the left, kind of where the green areas are. That's the native range, and so it's pretty much found as throughout the South and the eastern part of the United States, as far west as eastern Texas and Nebraska. And it's only basically as far south as where it still gets some chilling, although there are people growing pawpaw down along the Gulf Coast. In fact, I'm going down there next month to talk to a Gulf pawpaw growers group that they've formed, about 100 people. So there are folks growing in Louisiana and some of those areas where they're not native. But the other little diagram on the side is kind of where pawpaw could be grown, right? And that's based on the growing zones where it can survive. So it can be grown across much of the United States. And if you go on Facebook a lot like I do, there's all kinds of these Facebook pages of pawpaw fanatics, and they're growing pawpaw everywhere across the United States. And it's grown in many, many countries outside the United States now too. There's a lot of folks growing in South Korea, China. It's grown a lot through Europe where there's chilling areas too. So it's really found its niche even outside the United States. And this is actually up at Cove Spring Park. If you ever get up to that park here in Frankfurt, it's a kind of a typical pawpaw patch when you look at it, and all these. I'm going to take a chance and nope, there we go. All these are pawpaw trees up in there, and it's just a really typical of a pawpaw patch where they sucker a lot, and so you'll get these patches of maybe a couple hundred plants, and they're all genetically identical because they came from the same root system. And so you'll see a lot of that, and I get a lot of emails. Sherry Crabtree works with me, also gets a lot of emails, and people will say, well, I've got a pawpaw patch like this, and I never see any fruit in that patch. Why is that? And it's probably kind of 3 reasons. One is that's a really shaded patch, right? Very shaded, doesn't get a lot of sunlight, and the tree still needs some sunlight in order to get some fruit. Another reason could be the lack of pollinators. I'll show you in a second. Flies are the pollinators, and they're not real, energetic pollinators of the flowers. And so if you don't have many flies around, you won't get many fruit either, because they do need to also cross-pollinate. And that's another problem. If you've got a patch and they're all genetically the same because they came from the same root system, they're not going to be genetically different to basically have the pollen from the flowers then be different to cross-pollinate. So that's usually the 3 reasons why people don't have the actual fruit in their patches. But it has this nice mango, banana, mango, pineapple kind of flavor to it. Really very, very good for value-added products, but also good for fresh market. And it has that kind of custardy-like flesh. Sometimes it's almost like an avocado. Some are a little firmer than others, but most are not that firm, and it is very nutritious. Now, there are actually the popularity of pawpaws has been going up over the last few years. In fact, the last USDA Ag Census in 2022 actually had pawpaw for the first time. And so people could check off that they were growing pawpaw. And so I think it was 96 farms here in Kentucky actually said they're commercially growing pawpaw. So, unfortunately, we couldn't beat out Ohio. I think they had 156, but there you go. And so, but there's quite a few commercial growers out there, but they're smaller, and they're not as big as apple grower plantings, but there are definitely quite a few new growers out there, and mainly growing for fresh market or processing. And a lot of homeowners would like to buy the trees also. I'll talk about this in a minute. The trees are really valuable right now. So, but there's a lot of homeowners that will go out and buy them. Has that nice fall color, and a lot of folks are planting them for the butterfly gardens because that zebra swallowtail butterfly up there, the larva will only eat pawpaw leaves as its exclusive food, right? So if you do see that butterfly around, that means you've got some pawpaw patches around, and so it can be planted as basically a butterfly garden addition. And as I said, in the springtime, people will plant them for the flowers, but they're not a real showy flower. They're kind of this maroon flower with kind of a fetid odor, and a lot of times people will kind of look at it and smell it, and they'll kind of detect almost kind of like a meaty flavor or aroma. And that's what attracts a lot of the pollinators. And so I've actually got a graduate student who's been working on this, and because we don't really know what the pollinators all are of pawpaw. We see a lot of these lady beetles full of pollen, and we also see, I'm not sure I got a fly in this one, but there are flies also. There it is. Yep, right next to it. I should know because I took that picture, and so it's right down in here. And so flies will also go into these flowers and transfer the pollen around. So I've only seen bees in the orchard a couple of times, and that's probably because they got lost from Tom Webster's hive. I guess they were just happening through. But we never catch any bees when we actually have been trying to capture the pollinators. It's only flies, beetles, and about 60 other insects. So there's a whole bunch of different insects that actually go and visit the flowers in the spring. Now, how many of them actually transfer pollen and are involved in that, it's hard to say. But you can see the pollen, flies and beetles are definitely important. So if you're interested in planting pawpaws, here's a few things about where to plant them and then some cultivar information. Basically wherever you would produce any other fruit tree, that's probably a good place to grow pawpaws. And so a lot of times we talk about having good air drainage. And you can see in this picture we got a little bit of a slope. It's good not to plant these in the lowest areas of a valley because cold air in the spring, when they flower, right, the pawpaws are going to flower in about April, cold air will flow down into the valleys, into the hollers or whatever you want to call it, and you'll get these freezing temperatures down there that will freeze the flowers, and then you won't get fruit. And when it comes to flowers, the difference between like 28 degrees and 28.5 degrees will make all the difference. And 28 is kind of the critical temperature for destroying the flowers. So it may be a half a degree warmer up the hill compared to lower on the hill. So, you do find pawpaws along the stream beds at the bottom of those valleys oftentimes, but they're propagating by root suckering that I just showed you more than they are probably producing flowers every year. So if you do have air drainage, that's a good thing. The cold air will flow down and you'll improve your chances of keeping the flowers in the spring. You want to have a deep, fertile soil if possible. The deeper the soil, the bigger the reservoir of water and nutrients that you're going to have. So that's why you'd like to have as much depth. Here we have a lot of limestone floaters. It's okay, the trees will just kind of find their way with their taproot down through those. Anyways, weed control, very important. Now, you'd be surprised, even with peaches or apples too, if you don't control the weeds right around a tree, grass really does outcompete the tree for resources, so you really need to control that. And glyphosate does have a label that you can use on pawpaws commercially, So you can spray a herbicide around glyphosate, or you can do mechanical disruption. You can till around the trees, or you can do wood chip mulch. And that's what a lot of folks do if it's smaller plantings. That's what I do at my own house, hauling wood chip mulch, put around the tree. But that's really helpful, especially on small trees, because that grass really will compete for resources. You should do a soil test too. You're probably going to have to add some nitrogen. And initially, that might be just an ounce of 10-10-10 kind of in the summer of the first year, and then usually fertilizing in the winter after that. So here's some more about establishment. And that's actually a tree in my backyard, so it kind of shows you that wood chip mulch, any kind of hardwood. I guess we got to go back. Any type of hardwood mulch will do pretty well for that. These tree tubes, are you guys familiar with tree shelters? They're kind of, basically, it's a thin-walled kind of plastic tube, and a lot of people use it in forestry too for trying to increase the growth. It's like a little greenhouse, really. And so if you put these tree shelters on in the springtime, you'll have better growth of those trees that first year. By the time you get to July, though, you might want to put this on in April when you plant the tree, but you might want to take them off already in July, just because you can get some heating in there. Now, if you do have holes in the bottom, so you get some ventilation, you can probably leave it on. Otherwise, you get kind of a too hot a greenhouse effect inside. Do have to irrigate pawpaws. They do not take drought well, especially early on. So you've got to irrigate. About an inch a week is usually what we say of rain. And then for nitrogen, as I said, maybe about an ounce the first year, and then 4 or 5 ounces per tree after that as they start getting a little older. And here's a good example of a planting. A lot of times we want to have room to drive equipment down the alleyways, right? So even if it's a gator, they can really spread out into those alleyways. So we usually say 18 to 20 feet, really 20 feet probably, or even more if you've got the room. And then about 8 feet between trees. And in the end, and you'll see some pictures of this, you're really going to get almost a pawpaw hedge at the end. And that's not a bad thing, because they are a native understory tree that I just showed you. They don't mind shade, but they don't produce as many fruit in shade. And so, but a little bit of shading as a hedge is not a bad thing. So there'll be these kind of hedges of trees in the end. Oh, and I was going to say, spring planting is probably, we say that's the best, but you can plant pawpaws in the fall. So if you do have some pawpaw trees right now and they've gone dormant, you can plant them. It's just that spring planting tends to be a little better, maybe better odds for the tree surviving. So there's two things, and we talk about any kind of fruit tree, we talk about training and pruning, and those are kind of two different things. Training is when the tree is young and we're trying to form an architecture of the tree, basically. And if you look down in the bottom kind of left, that's an example of a pawpaw that's central leader training, okay? And that's basically we're removing any of the kind of narrow angled branches. We're trying to kind of thin it out and create a strong leader to get the tree to go up faster. And on the right side there, you'll see it's a minimally pruned tree, and that's kind of what you would see in nature. So the good thing about doing central leader training is you really have a strong architecture. It delays how much fruit you're going to get initially, but you will have this really strong tree. And pawpaws are really kind of tend to break in the wind. If you've got an area that's kind of windy and you'll get fruit clusters on those branches, you want to have strong branches, and so otherwise they will break off and the whole limb will break off. So it's probably worth trying to do that type of central leader pruning if you have the ability to do that, because you're going to develop a stronger tree. So after the tree gets larger, after that, we kind of form the architecture after about 2-3 years, then you want to start pruning for increasing the amount of flowering surface. So the pawpaw tree flowers on the last year's wood, right? So whatever it produces and for growth like this year, next spring, that's where the flowers buds are going to be, and they're going to flower. So you want to keep it kind of reshooting and keep it regrowing. So you're going to come along and you're going to basically trim out a few of the branches, not too far back, to kind of keep spurring on growth in the trees. And you're going to try and induce that branching. And that way you're going to keep getting kind of flowering wood. And if you don't do that, they kind of start slowing down. They don't produce a lot of growth in any branches, and they don't have any flower buds anymore. So you definitely want to keep, but you don't want to prune more than about 20% of the tree any one year. If you do more than that, it doesn't respond well to that kind of heavy pruning. So, pawpaw harvest. How do you know when a pawpaw is ripe? It's really when it's soft. That's really what means that's when it's starting to ripen. And so it's just like a ripening peach. If you ever picked a peach off the tree, it's a little soft and it kind of easily pulls off the tree, it's ripe. Now, just like a banana, if you over-ripen it, it'll have kind of more of a caramel flavor. A lot of people like an over-ripened pawpaw, so you can harvest them off the tree when they're just starting to soften, kind of ripen them up in a ripening room at your house or processing facility, and then you can process them or you can sell them at that point. But that's when they're ripe, and they also have a very strong aroma at that time. Now, when they drop in the ground, it's like anything else we worry about. Well, was there some, feces down there, right? Were the deer there or something else? And so that's why we tend to tell people not to sell fruit off the ground, but to pick it, hand harvest it, and sell it. So usually you're going to be harvesting on the same tree over several weeks, and that's really the great thing about pawpaw is you don't have to spray for anything. With apples, you have to spray for codling moth or other fungicides. Well, you don't have to do any of that for pawpaw. It's a native tree. But you are going to be harvesting more than you would like with apples. You might go through one time and just harvest all the apples off a tree because you have kind of a condensed ripening. With pawpaws, they flower over the course of maybe 2 weeks on the same tree in the spring. You're going to be harvesting for maybe 2 or 3 weeks off the same tree in the fall. So it does take a bit more labor. That's when the labor that comes into pawpaws is harvesting maybe 2 or 3 times a week for 3 weeks off the same tree. But it does give you a source of fruit like this then for sale for farmers markets and such. And this is kind of a overripe pawpaw, but they really, once they fully ripen, they're only really good for about 2-3 days. Then they'll start to kind of turn very dark brown, and they're not really good to eat anymore. You can put them in the refrigerator for maybe up to 2 weeks in plastic bags, or even 3. And you can still sell them or process them at that time. But that's kind of why pawpaw, in the past, people probably say, why can't I get pawpaws in Kroger? That's kind of the reasoning right now is that they ripen very quickly. We can't really stop the ripening process, and they tend to get very easily bruised when they get ripe. And so at this point, you've got to pick up at just the right time, transport them to a store, and then they're only going to be good for maybe a week. And so really our processing potential is where we see pawpaw kind of as a next step. And we've got several different ways. I mean, if you're a homeowner, you can use a kind of a fry basket. You can use a lingerie bag. You kind of put the pulp and the seed in there after you scoop it out of the pawpaw. Or you can use something like a aroma saucer. Commercially, we've got something called a RoboCoop, which is about a $5,000 unit, which I think we have over here next door. And it works really well for processing large amounts of pulp. But the biggest problem is we can't just throw the whole fruit in, right? You've got to actually cut the fruit in half, scoop out the pulp and the seed, and then that processor will separate the seeds and the pulp. But that's the best quality pulp. Now, you can sell this pulp very readily. There's a lot of people who want to buy it. Jeffita Creed is right up the road here. If you've ever seen it, it's a distillery on I-64. They processed 5,000 pounds of pawpaw fruit last year to making their brandy, and so they were buying fruit to do that. A lot of places are looking for pulp or they're looking for fruit. So, and beer, brandy, wine are kind of the major commercial buyers right now, but then there's a lot of folks making small amounts of jam and just frozen pulp for restaurant use too. So there's definitely a nice niche market there for pulp if you're interested in doing that. And for fresh market sales, it really is about $6 to $10. Clifford England sells over at the Lexington Farmers Market. He usually sells at $10 per pound for the fruit. I think it's going to depend on your vicinity. I know, like in some areas of eastern Kentucky, they've been selling for less per pound, but in major urban areas, you're going to find probably a better market for higher prices. If you go to like the Louisville Pawpaw Festival, because we were there recently, and that was something that just started 2 years ago, they were selling all their fruit for $15 a pound, and all the vendors who came sold out. So, there's some opportunities there for folks. So once again, maybe online sales. They are kind of hard to ship, but there are some people that will send fruit wrapped in basically bubble wrap. That's probably the best way to ship a fruit. Individually wrap each fruit and then send it. And so some companies have been sending a mail order that way. And then, of course, we have the value-added products. So if you're interested in some varieties, if you want to put in, there's seedlings and there's grafted trees. And so with seedlings, pawpaws are kind of like you and I, our children. If we have children, they are not necessarily exactly like you, right? And so that's with pawpaw too. It's the result of sexual recombination, so the seeds may or may not be true to the original parent. And so you can plant seedlings, but you don't know that the quality of the fruit will be real good. Sometimes pawpaws tend to be kind of small and seedy, and if you see an elongated pawpaw, it probably means it has a lot of seed in relation to pulp. If it's more like an egg, that means it's probably got a higher amount of pulp to seed. And seedlings also have to go through a period of juvenility, so that can take a while for them to actually flower and fruit. So we do have some recommended varieties, which I'll talk about here in a second. I'll show you some pictures, and they will actually produce fruit maybe in 3 to 4 years, but they are going to cost you more. Seedlings right now in the industry, you can probably buy for $5 to $10, or you can just buy seed and grow them yourself. Grafted trees run anywhere from $35 to about $100 per tree, and as I said, there's a real shortage of trees out there. Nurseries are really charging a lot of money for trees right now. The best thing you can probably do if you're trying to get into this as a farm would be to buy seedlings or grow your own seedlings out, plant them, and then buy a few grafted trees and then propagate from those grafted trees, because they do graft really easily. And so basically, there are folks out there who if you want to produce seed, just take the seed out of the fruit. You want to clean it off. You want to keep it moist, so you put it into wet peat moss, and then you want to refrigerate it, because they do need a period of refrigeration for about 3 months before they would germinate. Don't put it in the freezer. If you put it in the freezer, it will kill the seed, because the seed has a lot of water in it. It's a high water content. So you want to just put it in the refrigerator. And after it gets that chilling period, you can put them into tall pots like we see on the bottom here, because it gets a strong taproot that goes down. And you can get some really nice sized seedlings in a year. You don't have to have a greenhouse. You can do this outside in a shaded area too. And you'll get some really nice seedlings. And then you can plant them in the fall or the next spring if you want to overwinter those. And that can be your rootstock basically for planting. And this just kind of shows you, here's how you could grow your own. If you had your own seedlings out there, you can use these grafting tools. And we had 3 grafting workshops last year in the spring for folks who want to register and learn how to do this. So we'll train you how to do it. Very easy to do it after you've done it a few times. But you can either use a tool like a top grafter. You can also do a whip and tongue with a knife. So there's a number of ways you can take the bud from a really good variety and take it and clone it, right, by putting it under a rootstock, and then that bud becomes the tree. And then you know you're going to get a good fruit quality. So 3 or 4 years later, you've got a really good tree. So here's some of the varieties that are out there if you're interested. So we started releasing pawpaws about 10 years ago, and this is our first release. It's KSU Atwood. We wanted to have a distinctive trademark series that was named after African Americans who had contributed here at K-State. And so Rufus B. Atwood was the longest-serving president of Kentucky State University. He's also a civil rights leader, and he was an ag instructor before he came up from Prairie View A&M to become the president of Kentucky State University. So we wanted to name that first one after him. It's a really good tree, really good variety, produces a lot of fruit per tree at maturity, which is about 6-7 years, and is very mango-like, very much like a mango. And so you can buy these trees from nurseries. We get a little royalty money back. But they do run basically anywhere from about $35 at the cheapest to about $100 each in the nursery trade. This is KSU Benson. It was named after Harold R. Benson, who was our long-serving land grant director here. Of course, the farm is named after him also. And it has also a really round fruit, right? So it has a really good ratio of pulp to seed. And so that's kind of that indicator, but it's really like a cannonball. It's so round, and a lot of people really like the flavor. And then we have KSU Chappelle, and it was named after Lucy and Roy Chappelle. Lucy Chappelle was a social worker in Chicago, did a lot of great things, and then Roy Chappelle was a Tuskegee Airman, so we wanted to name this one after both of them. So this is KSU Chappelle. Neil Peterson, if you ever get into the pawpaw world, you're going to hear the name Neil Peterson. He's bred a lot of really great pawpaws that I'm going to show you in a minute. And he thought this was maybe one of the best tasting pawpaws he's ever had, the Chappelle variety. So some other ones that are out there in the nursery trade that we've recommended through the years based on taste tests. NC1 is a really good one. Also has a really kind of almost a melon aftertaste also. This is Overlease, which originally was selected in Indiana, and it also has that very round-like fruit, has a really good flavor, has a really strong melon aftertaste, kind of cantaloupe flavor, and it's also a really good one. And Sunflower was originally selected in Kansas. It also is a very productive tree. We use it in a parent in a lot of our breeding programs because it's so productive, and you can also buy that one in a lot of different places. And then we get into the Peterson pawpaws. So all of Neil Peterson's selections that he's named are named after Native American rivers, basically. So you can see this one is Potomac, has this really huge fruit. It doesn't have a lot of fruit per tree, but they're huge. And another example is Shenandoah, which was one of his first releases. It's a really mild beginner's pawpaw, but really good, and it's worth planting some of the Shenandoah for your customers. And then Wabash has this really dark kind of flesh. It's more of a darker orange, which I think makes it a really good processing pawpaw. Does tend to crack a little bit. Pawpaw tends to get this Phylosticta fungus sometimes on the skin, and some of these are kind of prone to that cracking issue anyway because they're large fruit. So sometimes you'll get a little of this fungus on the outside of the fruit, and you'll see that kind of in the picture up there, and it'll get worse, and then you'll get a rainstorm and cracking, and it will cause you to lose the fruit. But it still doesn't happen often enough not to plant that variety. And here's Susquehanna. Most people feel like this is Neil's best release. Really good flavor, always is at the top of the taste tests, and so it's a really good one for you to plant also. So at K-State, we released those first 3 selections. We've done a lot of crosses since then. Many of them have Susquehanna as a parent or Sunflower for various reasons. And we do have 2, now they're just numbers, High 1.4 and High 7.1. And we're going to release those next year with new names. We haven't quite picked them yet. And so there'll be really good additions to large fruited selections that I think people are really going to like. We've also done about 1,500, we have 1,500 seedlings that are a result of those crosses, those parents I just talked about. So we're actually looking at the fruit quality right now. We just started last year. So we'll probably have some more varieties out of those crosses. So we're pretty excited about, where we are with Pawpaw. If you'd like to know more about Pawpaw, you can go to the Facebook page. We do update that basically every few weeks or every week with different information, and then also the website. And if you're also interested, next year, we're going to have the 5th International Pawpaw Conference, and that's going to be September 9th, 10th, and 11th. So if you're really into pawpaw, you can have a real adventure because you can go the weekend before that, I think it'd be the 7th, maybe it's 6th or 7th, that Saturday will be the Louisville Pawpaw Festival. You can go to that. Then you can hang around, and then Tuesday we'll start the Pawpaw Festival or Pawpaw Workshop here. You'll have 3 days of pawpaw here, and then you can take a day trip up to the Pawpaw Festival up in Athens, Ohio, which usually has about 10,000 people at it, and also see some of the workshops up there. So you can do a whole week of pawpaw if you wanted to do that, and I know some will. And we are planning on bringing probably about 15 international speakers, because there's all kinds of people working on pawpaw across the world now, and so we want to bring folks in to hear what they're doing. Croatia has planted hundreds of acres of pawpaws for basically brandy production, so we're hoping to bring in some folks from Croatia. So should be exciting, and so we'll put out announcements about this conference in January if you're interested in coming. And then we will release those 2 varieties then with names that I just talked about during that conference. So do you have any questions about pawpaw that you'd like to bring up? Do you think you'd like to plant, I guess, some of the new varieties that we have? Or if you're interested also, we do some trials. And so if you might be interested in a year or so, because right now we're just trying to bring up the number of seedlings we have, we're going to graft those, and we will have some small trials of some of those advanced selections if you're willing to put those in and tell us how they do. So if you want to come up afterwards and give me your information, we'll contact you when that happens. So probably it may be the next, I guess it'll be next spring is when that would happen. Not this spring, but the next spring. So any other questions? Yes. So the cracking itself, is just kind of like a tomato. Sometimes it just, when a fruit develops kind of under more drought conditions, the skin tends to kind of be thicker, and then if you get a big rain event, the plant will just start pumping a lot of water through, and a lot of times plants kind of, or the fruit loses elasticity to be able to handle that. So when a lot of water comes in, then it can crack, and so that's one reason. And the other is that phallosticta fungus that I talked about. And so the worst case scenario is when you kind of have both things going on. You might have phallosticta that infects in the spring because you get a wet spring, and then it dries out, and then suddenly you get rainstorms, and so you've got weak, really weak skin on the fruit, and then all of a sudden it just cracks. And once it cracks, all these bacteria and insects and everything else get into the fruit, and it ruins it. So you're just out of luck using the fruit after that. So it's the bigger ones, even the bigger fruit, tend to crack more, but some are even worse than others, like Wabash, NC1, and Potomac. They're probably the worst at cracking. And because Susquehanna, even though it's a larger fruit, does not crack much, and Atwood, Chappelle, and Benson do not crack much. So, but it's just one of those unfortunate things where you've got a great crop, and then all of a sudden you lose 20% of your fruit to a rain event. It's disheartening. But anyways, it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. So. So, and I will say too, if you're interested in trees this year, I think the Kentucky Department of Forestry still has some seedlings, and they usually come out here, collect fruit, get seeds, and then they've started their own little seed orchard. And so you can buy a pack of 10 trees. It's probably the cheapest value of trees, although you don't know what the genetics will be. I think it's 10 trees for $45. 25 trees for $75, and 100 trees for $100. Now, how that price? I don't know how they ever came up with that. Makes no sense, but yeah, for $100 for 100 trees, that's a really good deal. even then for $4.50 a tree, if you're buying 10 trees for $45, that's not bad. But anyways, kind of interesting. But they did have trees. I think they had like 50,000 trees to sell this last year. It's like the largest I've seen them do. So if you go to their webpage and look for the division of, the Division of Forestry, Nursery, and you'll find a webpage where you can buy the trees. And they sell a lot of different things: walnuts, pine trees, pawpaws. Sometimes even American persimmon, but I think they're sold out. So, good place to buy your rootstock. So, okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I guess we could take our break a little early, and but otherwise, I'll be here if you want to come up and give me your name too for the trials coming up. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and thanks for coming.